New Way Dharma Talks.
Today I'm going to talk about the Noble Eightfold Path and give you a quick overview of that. We've already had a talk on the Four Noble Truths, so this follows on from that. And it is a neat way of remembering fairly comprehensively the teachings of the Buddha. And as we go deeper in our understanding, we don't really need to think in terms of an Eightfold Path. But this is useful in reminding us that the Buddha is not just interested on sitting in meditation. This is a whole of life approach. It embraces all aspects of our lives. Meditation is certainly at the heart of it, but you couldn't just meditate and leave everything else as it is. So our whole attitude and understanding gradually changes with meditation at the heart of it. So the Noble Eightfold Path is a way of capturing, if you like, the whole teaching of the Buddha in three basic segments. One segment is the ethical or moral teaching. Another segment is the meditational teaching. And the third segment is what you might call the wisdom or insight teaching. As we go along, we start with changes perhaps in our behavior and start opening ourselves up more in paying attention to what is around us, developing our awareness generally. But as we go on deeper and deeper, the changes start to become more radical until we get to a point where we see that previously we had somehow misunderstood the nature of our lives, and that misunderstanding was generating a lot of unhappiness and conflict, bad thoughts, unhelpful attitudes within us. So it is a developmental process. And the Noble Eightfold Path is not meant to be a series where you master one segment and then you go on to another segment and then you go on to another segment. It's really one path with 8 different aspects, if you like, or 8 different dimensions. So you could really start any way you like. But traditionally, we start with number 1, which is right understanding. Now, what do we mean by right understanding? I'm going to try to cover this quickly, so I can't go very deeply. And of course, it will take months or years to follow the path and really understand what this Noble Eightfold Path means. But let's make an effort to comprehensively at least have a glimpse of what it means. Right understanding is essentially, I suppose, the Four Noble Truths, which we heard about last week, and you can listen to that talk separately. And that tells us that we human beings are essentially disturbed, dissatisfied, anxious, and this doesn't really go away. In fact, as you get older, it probably increases. This is very fundamental in us. It can't really be addressed in simple ways, but we try to address it through pleasure seeking, through entertainment and so on, and the Buddha has got no problem with that. It's just that he says it doesn't go very deeply really. We are still left with this underlying dissatisfaction. Now, I won't repeat everything I said in the talk on Four Noble Truths, but the right understanding is first of all to see that this is basically true, this dissatisfaction. And I think as we get older, we all see that it has got some underlying truth in it. If you don't see that or accept that, then that is okay. Just carry on with life, and you may see it or may not see it later on. So right understanding is accepting that, well, we are basically dissatisfied. Why? It's something to do with our always wanting more, not wanting what we have got, that if we can become aware of that, understand that, and in understanding it, we can at least partially move beyond it or make adjustments, and even if we tried very, very hard, perhaps go entirely beyond that misunderstanding of things to a different attitude entirely. But that would require ultimately renunciation, in the sense in which a monk or a nun renounces the world And we're a lay movement, and we're not trying to do that. We are trying to make things better for ourselves, and we will remain engaged with the world, with our families, with society, with all the difficulties of life, and try to ameliorate those difficulties through our understanding of the Dharma. So right understanding is basically when you're gradually coming to see that human beings live in ignorance, and they are largely creating their own problems through their misunderstanding of what they are and what reality is. That replication of our dissatisfaction, our conflicts, is called samsara. It's a notion of a miserable world, basically, which we generate for ourselves. Not that it is miserable in itself, but we do a pretty good job of making it miserable because of our misunderstanding of it. There is a word for it, and that is samsara. I don't know in English what you'd call it. It's a kind of a vision of the world as being dysfunctional because of our misunderstanding. Now, the opposite of that would be something like nirvana or nibbana, which means having a deep understanding of how we generate our own misery and how we can move towards peace and in fact dwell in peace, at least as lay people, a lot more than we currently do. So the first step of the Noble Eightfold Path then is right understanding, switching from this living in continual duplication, replication, reproduction of our misery to a state in which we have wisdom, meaning that we understand how we're generating it. We also have compassion in that we realize that we've suffered unnecessarily and others are suffering unnecessarily. And peace, meaning that we can go to a different place in ourselves in which we don't go on replicating our own misery. So this is really the first step, the right understandings, just having a vision of how that all works. Now, I've just said it in a few words, but of course we actually need to do something on ourselves to break through all our preconceptions, our presuppositions, our ignorance, to actually see more deeply into this truth of right understanding. Right understanding is not to be contrasted with wrong. Right is never contrasted with wrong here, but simply with, if you like, helpful or unhelpful. So right understanding is helpful understanding. Understanding that is helpful to gaining deeper peace. The second noble truth is right intention, which is a translation, and not a very good one, but it means something like, I would say, a right or helpful attitude, whole attitudinal change or change of heart. And the very core of that is letting go and compassion, which I've just mentioned. So right intention is having an attitude of not attaching and clinging to things and demanding that things be the way you want them to be, only to find out that they can't, and you make yourself miserable, make everyone else miserable, and at the end of it you get sick, you get old, and you die. What was the point of that? And if you look at what people say about the regrets that they have towards the end of their lives, it's often precisely that they've spent their whole life working too hard, being too ambitious, trying to get more and more stuff, etc., etc., and at the end they didn't find any satisfaction in it. So right intention is a reorientation of one's intention in life so that one has a more modest, sustainable kind of approach in life, more kindliness towards other people, more kindliness towards nature, letting go of one's demanding, grasping self. And in doing that, one is developing compassion for oneself and for others and for all other creatures. We certainly need this change as human beings, both individually and collectively, because clearly the truth of samsara is now hitting us very hard. Economically, financially, politically, environmentally, in terms of climate change, in terms of what we have done to ourselves on this small planet that is our home. We need a kind of spiritual revolution, change our whole outlook And we start with ourselves. We don't demand it of the banks or demand it of the government. We begin by demanding it of ourselves. This right intention. Right, so that's the second dimension. Now that is the wisdom part of it all, if you like. Then we have 3 steps which are the ethical training. Right speech, right action, right livelihood. There's a simpler way of putting this is saying that all you do in your ordinary life, we need to subject to our mindfulness. So we need to be mindful in our speaking and listening, in our communicating. We need to be mindful in our conduct and behavior and relationships. And we need to be mindful in what we do for a living. I often start the teachings with right speech, simply because it seems to be the simplest place to start. Talking about samsara and so on seems to be a little bit abstract and philosophical. Right speech is pretty easy to understand, but it's a little deeper than just being polite to each other. We English are very good at being polite to each other. Politeness doesn't necessarily go very deep. We're going deeper with right speech. It's about helpful speech, helpful to compassion, wisdom, and so on. And it's not just about how we speak, but generally how we communicate, how we listen, and whether we do listen to others, and whether we can let go of our ego when we're communicating with others. That's really important. In a way, the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path is about softening and letting go of the ego. That'd be the shortest statement of the path, letting go of the ego. Right action. Here we think basically of our relationships and whether our conduct and our behavior, the things we do and the things we don't do, are harmful or not harmful to ourselves, to others, and to nature at large. And also central here is the idea of karma, which is not as it's often taught. We here teach something rather different, and that is karma is something to be understood not as a distant consequence of what one does or fails to do, but right here and now, it has a consequence for you. So if I'm behaving harmfully, I am hurting myself, first of all. I am an unhappy person if I'm behaving in a harmful way. If an angry person, then I might direct my anger at someone else. And in some teachings you say, well, if you're angry, somehow later on you will suffer from it. My understanding of the Buddha is that if you're angry, you are suffering the anger. So the anger is a suffering. A craving is a suffering. If you crave something, whatever it is, you are suffering. You try to fill the gap with something. It could be anything from sex to alcohol to drugs to ambition, filling that gap, craving, wanting more. And to be in a state of craving is to be in a state of suffering. So that's karma. It's direct. It doesn't come around later. You don't drink too much and then suffer the consequences later. You're suffering the consequences when you are drinking, because you're not living your life in a sustainable, happy way. In fact, the drinking is a response to unhappiness, as with other things that we crave. So that's right action. Right livelihood, a lot of us are engaged one way or another in a very complex society in ultimately generating a lot of harm. It was easy in the Buddha's day, people had simple jobs, fisher, farmer, whatever. You could see the consequences of your action. We now live in a society that's so complex that it's easy to lose contact with what are ultimately the consequences of the work that one is doing. But in New Buddha Way, we try to bring that to light and help you to think about it. We're not saying you should all become farmers, definitely not. But if you start thinking about it, you can ask yourself certain questions. Am I working too hard? What am I working for? Have I got the work-leisure balance right? Is my work sustainable for me, my family, for society at large? Could I be doing more that is self-sustaining? Could I be spending more of my time growing my own vegetables, for example? Well, why not? There are so many things that I could be spending time on, but instead I get up in the morning, I rush off to work, do a job which I may not like, don't know what the consequences ultimately of it are, and then rush back home exhausted and then start, drinking the sherry or whatever it is. I'm not saying, we don't all live like this, I know, but I think it's a caricature. I think you can all see what I mean. It's perhaps surprising that a spiritual teacher like the Buddha would be interested in how we work. But how can we go on working in a self-destructive and socially destructive way and expect to find any peace? It doesn't add up. So the Buddha's approach is holistic. Right speech, right action, right livelihood. Now we get to the final little package, which is meditation techniques, if you like. And that's right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right effort is about developing the awareness to understand one's own states of mind and see which states of mind are harmful to you and to others, and which states of mind at least are harmless and better are fruitful for you and for others. We need to take out time from samsara to sit and think, then look and see what is going on in my mind. What state of mind do I have? Now we will come to this in more detail, so that we can recognize what is going on within ourselves and understand that states of mind have an origin and they develop and they get out of hand. Or they have an origin, they develop fruitfully and they have benefits. So one's attitude or one's right intention is developing through directing one's effort not to grabbing something from the world, but directing one's effort to understanding one's own state of mind and revamping, remolding, reshaping one's states of mind. So that's what right effort is about. It's absolutely vital. In many ways, I think teaching on right effort is a much neglected and key aspect of the Buddha's teachings. And there are embedded in that many techniques on becoming aware of how certain thoughts, feelings, desires emerge and how to control them, how to develop more fruitful states of mind in terms of what it is that one wants to do next, or what one thinks next, or what one is going to say next. We can do this because it's about developing self-awareness. And self-awareness is a power that you have if you develop it. So that's right effort. It is a meditational technique because it is actually mindfulness of one's own states of mind. Keep coming back to mindfulness. Right, the next dimension is right mindfulness. Now, I'd rather take right mindfulness and right concentration together, because I often think that right concentration should really have been mentioned first, although traditionally it's mentioned after right mindfulness. Concentration should be mentioned first, whereas traditionally right mindfulness is mentioned first. Take them together. Concentration is learning how to focus the mind, to keep it in one place such that everything else is dropping away. You're learning how to let go. You're training the mind in letting go, which is useful for right effort and everything else. And it is a kind of fixed concentrate, fixed focus. You're fixing it in one place, which is a technique in itself. But mindfulness is a development of that, because once you have the power to concentrate the mind, you don't have to just fix it in one place. You can then use the power of attention and investigation, if you like, of one's experience with anything that arises. So then it becomes sometimes called momentary concentration. So fixed concentration or momentary concentration, which is mindfulness. Mindfulness has two levels. I don't know how to characterize these. except by saying one is what you might call therapeutic mindfulness, and the other, which is deeper, we might call existential mindfulness. There's a lot of excitement about mindfulness at the moment, but most of it is concerned with therapeutic mindfulness and neglects the whole setting of mindfulness within the Buddha's attempt to move us from samsara to peace. Therapeutic mindfulness says, look, if you develop self-awareness of your states of mind, then that will help you it'll help you with certain mental conditions such as depression and so on, and that is all true and is all very good. The Buddha's interest does not stop there. His mindfulness is existential mindfulness. He is saying that by mindfulness, by watching our own experience as bare experience in itself, very, very carefully, very minutely, you will find that everything's impermanent, everything's insubstantial, and everything has some kind of tension in it. And then you begin to question this division between an ego that I have in here and a world that is out there. That instead you begin developing an understanding in which everything is just phenomena, a buzz of phenomena, fleeting, as life is fleeting. And this helps to change. In fact, this is the Buddha's way of changing that attitude from the ignorance of samsara to the light and peace of nirvana. It is through existential mindfulness. It's seeing the true nature of myself, or what I take to be myself, and this reality around me. That is the mindfulness that the Buddha is interested in. But most of the hubbub we get about mindfulness at the moment is not actually about that at all, and doesn't understand what the Buddha is actually teaching. Not that I'm against therapeutic mindfulness, because it is doing a lot of good things for people which are very valuable. Concentration, also important. It's a training of the mind to let go by staying in one place. And the ego is subdued in that way. The ego is always the troublesome part, right at the center of samsara. So, right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, and where are we now? Right understanding. Because now we're back in a position to understand how to get ourselves out of this dark hole that we're in. There is light, but we have to work for it. We have to find the light. The light is already within you. It is there all the time. But we are rather like a man with a torch in broad daylight. We don't understand that if we can't see, it's because we've got our eyes closed. The torch is not going to help us if we've got our eyes closed. Shining a torch is like, in the daylight, is rather like grasping after entertainment, ambition in work, etc., in order to solve this deep level of dissatisfaction. Shining a torch in daylight doesn't really make any sense. The light is already there. You just have to find it because you are the one that's obscuring it. The veil is created by you and by us. Together we create it, actually, not just by you. It's created by this thing called civilization. So there is the Noble Eightfold Path in all its glory. That's a comprehensive overview of the Buddha's teaching. Now we have to do two things: improve understanding and change attitude. They work together. So we have to improve our understanding of the detail of the Noble Eightfold Path and the techniques and so on, and how it fits in with so many other things that we know, our general knowledge about politics, about religion, about science. It impacts on all of that in a general, holistic sort of way. And the other thing is attitude change. That's the difficult part. I can bring about some intellectual change, with difficulty, but it can be done, and that's what universities do, intellectual change. But most of it is intellectual change to feed into samsara, unfortunately. Attitude change is your business. A university is not likely to change your attitude except possibly for the worse. It is very unlikely that it would change it for the better. Attitude change, which will make you wiser and more peaceful, happier, more fully human, is your business and your responsibility. That's where it comes from. But we can do this together. So you're not on your own, ultimately. This is something for all human beings.
New Buddha Way approaches meditation as a way of life, letting go of East and West, past and future, and starting afresh here and now. To find out more, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.